Just a moment.
Okay.
Sure. This work is our working group, the group that Mike Taylor from Elsevier and I are co-chairing. Is one of 3 different working groups that came about as a result of the Sloan Foundation funding that was given to NISO a couple years ago. And actually, I don't think it's been 2 years. I think it's only just been maybe a year and a half. Martin would actually know more than I because he's far more intimately involved with this project and has been for a significant amount of time. And I invite him to jump in on that.
Almost 2 years. So it started summer 2013.
Okay, thank you very much. So, so this work commenced in a in a very enthusiastic fashion, and there was a white paper that was developed, which really went and described a number of different things that came from this, and hopefully, I don't know if there are going to be notes from this call, but maybe we can place a link to this project site where we have the links to the white paper and community input and timeline and so on. So the future work was scoped in terms of 3 working groups, one of which Mike Taylor from Elsevier and I are leading. And our work focuses primarily on metrics and persistent identifiers. And so we're in the process of trying to, of taking a step toward that. Data seem to be something that is of great interest to a number of different people. And there's a lot of really wonderful work happening in this area by the groups on this call, certainly, and it seems like a good place to start. I imagine we will also be looking at other areas of work over the course of our time together over the next year. So Mike or Martin, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that? I know it's not a very significant overview. Like I said, I'm kind of probably not as prepared as I should be to give an overview of NISO since I just got to the hotel at 1 o'clock this morning.
Well, something I would add is another group, and we started a discussion with them, which is Counter, which is sort of working on standards for user stats for scholarly content for a long time, but has just started to think about doing that also for data user stats. And we had a sort of just started to talk with them and see whether there can also be a counter standard for data usage. But that's sort of too early to report any results, but just that there's a discussion in another group relevant for bioCADDIE.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Actually, Christy, I don't know if you could see the screen, but I was showing the page. At least we have the links, but of course, any further links that we need to add, that's very well appreciated.
Oh, that sounds right. That's wonderful. And I'll actually, if it's all right with you, I'll go ahead and type up a few short notes and send those. Like I said, I apologize. I'm in San Francisco right now, so it's early and it's been kind of a crazy trip. So, but I'll get some things pulled together and send that. And if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
No, of course not. Thank you very much. So we will add everything. I'll send some really very basic notes, and the more we can summarize from each of those groups, it will be better. Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put these very basic notes into a Google document and share it with you all so you can feed it. And once we have enough of the links, we see what we need to transfer on this working group page to make it more visible to others and what we keep just in the notes.
Oh, that sounds great. That's very efficient. I like it. Thanks.
Well, we try to organize it because, yeah, we need to report everything. That's why I was supposed to record it from the beginning, but I forgot. Anyway. So, Martin, do you want to go next? Correct? I have the link to the Making Data Count project on the website, which I believe is the one you also cite in the Skype chat. Yes, in the chat.
Yes. And I don't plan on presenting anything. I rather try to give a short overview. So this project is more an implementation project rather than to think about how we could do things. And the project has 3 partners: the California Digital Library, the Data One Network, I'll talk about a bit more in a moment, and PLOS. And the expertise that PLOS brings in is the expertise of collecting metrics. Data One provides metadata about a large number of data sets from the geosciences. And CDL brings in expertise in data management and activities related to this. And the project has several parts. There was a first work package which we have completed, which was an activity of interviewing researchers and other stakeholders about the kind of metrics they think are important and aspects related to that. And that has been published and can be read up. And I think the not surprising result is that what everybody cares about is citations, and what comes second is downloads of data, but there are things like social media and other things are far less important. The central part of this project is to build a service that collects metrics for all the Data One data sets using the PLOS open source software that we use for articles. And the first part of that work involved adapting the software, and the main challenge there is persistent identifiers, because when you go from articles at a publisher that all have cross-ref DOIs, go to a data repository, you find all kinds of identifiers. A lot of the repositories in Data One use DataSite DOIs, but there are also ARCs and other identifiers, including internal identifiers that are then expressed as URLs. So that was one of the challenges to collect the metadata in a consistent way, and that challenge is still not totally resolved, because even though every data set, of course, has a persistent identifier, some of them are not as useful in collecting metrics in the outside world, because they might not really be used outside of the data center, whether it's in citations or particularly in social media. We have started to collect citations, and of course the challenge there is that you don't find them, and that is mainly for 2 reasons. One of them is they're usually not so easy to find in a publication, because they might not appear in a reference list. And the second problem is that this information is then not picked up by indexing services, etc. And of course, I'm not telling you anything new. The approach that we have taken is that we just use various data sources, and the most important data source in terms of results we find, and also most relevant for bioCADDIE, I guess, is the Europe PMC service, which basically means we do full text search in the European Open Access Corpus and find citations then both in reference lists and also in the text. So if there's, for example, a DataSite DOI in the middle of a method section, we find that. And we do something similar with 2 open access publishers, PLOS and BMC, where you can also search the full text. We do search on Nature, but that's an area that certainly needs to be expanded. And when I met with Mike yesterday, because some of us are in San Francisco right now, we talked about other publishers, whether that's possible to support that, finding these citations to data in the full text. The next challenge then is, if we said citations are what is most interesting for people, and user stats comes next. For the user stats, there are no standards how to report them, and we know from user stats for journal articles, if you just provide a number of download counts, this number has nothing to do with actual usage, and this might be 90% of these downloads might be bots or other sort of activities which we don't really want to count. So Data One embarked on a project to clean up the user stats from undesired activities, and we decided early on in the project that we want to use the approach that Counter has taken for articles, which basically means two things. One is double-click intervals. So if somebody repeatedly clicks on a link to download something, it will not be counted if the interval for HTML pages, for example, 10 seconds and 30 seconds for PDF. And the other part of Counter is basically a blacklist of user agents that you exclude, which is anything from sort of indexers for services like Google to robots and bots and other things. And because we aren't sure whether that part really applies to dataset, DataOne has actually done, and Matt Jones is the main person behind that, has actually done two things. So they provide a download count, which is the raw number in the beginning, then the download count after cleaning up according to Counter. And the third number is download starts cleaning up, but sort of a counter light, not excluding every bot, but keeping in bots that might not be as, that should maybe not exclude because there might be legislative activity of other data services connecting, etc. And this work has been completed just a few weeks ago, and we are right now in the next step, which is to integrate this with the service that collects all the other metrics. And then as a final step for the implementation part of the project to put all this together and generate reports, etc., and see the patterns. There are already a few things we have learned, and I mentioned some of them. What we have also learned, and I think that might also not be new for anyone on this call, is there is not a lot of reuse that we can find. It's really hard to find any citations to a data set other than the link by sort of the person who created a data set and used that data set in an article. So Dryad is one of the DataOne net nodes, and of course every Dryad data package has an associated article. So we find those links, but beyond that, there's little. The same is true for social media, for things like Mendeley and Wikipedia. For the user stats, we haven't really looked in detail at the data. And this draws important questions for us. One is it that these services aren't really adapted to data metrics? And a good example is for example, Mendeley, which is is built around Crossref DOIs, but has some problems with dataset DOIs and has even more problems with data sets that use other persistent identifiers. So even if people would use these services, it might be difficult to detect. I mentioned already citations, that there are probably a lot more out there, but they're very hard to find. So we have to work on that. The other part is that maybe data citation is just not happening. And that then, of course, can be that we're just too early and we have to, it's a chicken and egg situation. But there's another aspect to this, which is that maybe people don't cite the data, but they cite, for example, if there's an associated publication. So these are the kind of questions we want to address in the final part of the project when we analyze the data and write a report. And I think there's quite a lot of things that we learned already, and I hope to learn in the next few months that can be informative for bioCADDIE, because even though it's geosciences, although Dryad obviously is in the life sciences, I think there is probably something that can be learned from this in other disciplines.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Martin.
So this is Jeff. I just one quick question. I mean, you mentioned that you're doing the text mining for DOIs. Are you also doing that for the other persistent identifiers? So in the life sciences, GenBank and Geo, a lot of people will reference just with the the accession number, sort of the query format, where they go, where GenBank : or Geo : Are you also looking for that type of information, or?
Well, we use the identifiers used in DataOne. So some data sets have DOIs, some data sets have ARCs, some data sets have other identifiers. So we try text mine with those.
Okay.
So in theory, the same approach is applicable to GenBank, etc. But of course, it's much harder, as I don't have to tell you. And And of course, Joe McIntyre has done a lot of work with her own API to find these things and has published that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff you don't find, and that goes both ways. So mining publications for these identifiers and also looking at mentions of publications in the databases. And there's, unfortunately, if you go these different directions, as you, I'm sure, know, there's not too, the overlap isn't as nice as one would expect. So these challenges is something that is also relevant for data one, that some of these identifiers, I mean, DOIs are easy to identify in a text string search, but if it's just a number string, I'm sure you have lots of issues around that as well.
Yes, Jeff is chairing the working group on identifiers in bioCADDIE. Indeed, try to understand the situation there. I just want to just a quick note, because you say something quite important too for bioCADDIE. You say that I'm opening another page. You know, you say you have to go back to data one and they had to clean up the statistic or the metrics. Somehow what we indeed also the bioCADDIE need to achieve, but somehow in another working group. So here I'm showing you the list of working group that we have, which covers the topic that we will have to tackle. And we are here in group 5, but further down there is like repository collaboration, you know, and repository operator here, but the idea and criteria for being included in the DII. So somehow understanding what the metrics are for refined assertion, etc., will also help us to then go back to those databases that want to be resources, that want to be discoverable through the DDI, to make sure that they do serve certain metrics, or they do adhere to certain recommendations. So it's going to be a bidirectional discussion. And you also mentioned a lot of lessons learned, which actually reminds me that perhaps later, as we try to put down the notes and the minutes, what you could highlight is indeed the lesson you have learned, because that's exactly what we want to hear about bioCADDIE. What you've learned, what should not be made in a certain way or should be made in another way, and indeed that's what can bioCADDIE take from your lessons and recommends in the DDI implementation. Okay, I'm cautious about time. Given that you all been so kind already to join from the different locations, if we can just cover the last group, Suni, the Casterai, and then
yes, I will just make it very short, because I actually think I've already mentioned the big picture and how it feeds into the other groups. So as said, we are charged for the time being with the quality aspect, and as said, we are at the very beginning. So there were first meetings, and the intention right now is to get comprehensive understanding of what quality means for data, which is of course fairly difficult because everyone has a different understanding, and that's why we go into the individual use cases. Yeah, Susanna is showing the website, which does not say too much because it doesn't go very much detail, but it already gives you an impression that the different viewpoints are important, because obviously a repository provider and the funder, for example, have two different expectations and needs in terms of metrics generally and in terms of quality. So one wants to see if high quality data set has been shared or reused. The other one needs a more detailed assessment or insights into what kind of curation, for example, has been done or not. So these are the aspects we are looking at right now. So this is in preparation. The next meeting is in, I think 2 weeks time. So the there's a workshop happening in November, I think it is, Cambridge, together with the Biomed Bridges workshop, where first results are expected to be presented. By then, hopefully, we will will have advanced this picture quite significantly, meaning having this more granular view on quality, which I think we will have quite some intense discussions over the summer, and hopefully some ideas for indicators, which will be presented for discussion hopefully in November. So I think the connecting point, I mentioned it before, with bioCADDIE is indeed the use cases. Susanna, you already provided your viewpoint on data quality, and I think you also started with the different needs from your point of view. Others are working on that, as said, too. And then, so this is like the theoretical part I mentioned, and then the second part, which I believe comes after November, is the implementation. So, I mean, this is me just thinking out loud. Is, for example, I would be interested to see a test bed on bioCADDIE or other places, and for example at CERN on our platforms, and see, does it work, does it not work, and then we will hopefully be in a good place to evaluate such aspects. So, and I think this relates to what Martin was saying before. I mean, with bioCADDIE and for also the CERN community, we have quite some active data communities at our fingertips. So I think there's quite some momentum we could gain, or not gain, trigger or initiate with these with such implementations, if we make it work, of course.
Thank you. Yes, and actually, this is more or less the use cases I provided to the group. It's really what's on this slide, no more than that. In reality, that was it. So we only have really a few minutes. And do you? I mean, is there any specific? So there isn't much overlap, but given that these three groups, in addition, the tour project. You know, that there's a good sharing of people and connection of people. So can we safely say that there is no duplication and sufficiently one group is leveraging on the other experience? I just want to be reassured that this is the case and this is my understanding.
Yeah, no,
and that's
yeah. We've been working.
Yeah, I think.
Go for it, Sinji.
No, go for it, Mike.
I was just about to say we've been working really hard over the last few months to make sure that there isn't any duplication, because that was a real concern, I think, of everybody's.
That's brilliant. And somehow what we would like to reach as a picture of the bioCADDIE is to be able to write somehow, you know, the status quo of all these projects, very briefly, without having to duplicate material you already written somewhere else, but in a very digest form. And then from which we'll extract, as I say, what is then the developer team, you know, the objective part of can start, you know, go off and implement, or what is not really there yet. So this is somehow the picture that we need to gain as bioCADDIE. So if you help us towards that, we will feel very, you know, very, very grateful to you.
Can I
please, Martin,
just sort of talk 2 minutes about Thor, because there's one very important aspect for this project, which I think is
sorry, Martin, yeah, I forgot about
that. Which is very relevant here, and that's sort of before you do any metrics, you have to have persistent identifiers. And I think what Thor can inform bioCADDIE, because it has these different communities, is different approaches. And the approach that the life sciences take and that Joe McIntyre is representing in Thor, well, let's say query as a keyword, so identifiers that are strings and have prefixes. That is something that other communities might be doing differently, and I think that's a very important discussion to have, and I think it will happen in Thor anyway, and maybe that's something where we can, via Joe and EBI, can also connect with bioCADDIE and get input and have sort of inform each other.
I wanted to open, I see, oh, this is bizarre. The bioCADDIE website is under maintenance. Maybe somebody's doing an update on the identifier working group. Sorry, because I wanted to show you. I believe Joe, Jeff, am I wrong? Is Joe part of the identifier working group, or we have somebody?
I'll have to check. I thought we had invited her, so I can check.
Exactly. So we certainly, Joe has a paper that Julie Memory from the biometricians, which is also led by EDI, put together, which has been, I believe, Marty, you comment on it in your blog. And that paper is in the Zenodo, I believe, which is indeed trying to bring together at least the practice in the life science community. And yeah, I'm sorry, still under maintenance. I don't know why the working group is not. So now, at least Jeff should talk more about this because he is leading the identifier working group. Is taking that initial community view as a starting point. So and
in terms of the work, the identifier working group, I mean, we're not trying to, again, invent new identifier schemes, so, you know, using what's being used by the communities, but really, you know, what we're looking at is, you know, how does the DDI fit into sort of the whole ecosystem of identifiers? So, for example, you know, we mentioned Curies a couple times, but they're, you know, on the call yesterday, on Wednesday, you know, we're talking with Michelle Demontier, you know, who is actually the registry for Curie prefixes, and is there one that's needed? You know, there are a couple different organizations like identifiers.org, Bio2RDF that have some of that information, but, you know, there's no sort of formal agency or project that is sort of, you know, providing that type of service. And is that something that's needed? You know, is that something like, are the data discovery indices going to become sort of, you know, registrars of these things, sort of like the GoDaddies? You know, so I mean, the question is, what does larger ecosystem look like around identifiers?
We are in our working group charged with looking at identifiers, and we haven't done very much in that area at all. Being able to join and inherit some of your work would be a massive advantage.
Okay.
I'm speaking by myself without having spoken to Christy or Martin. But
well, I think it sounds wonderful.
I'm very excited to hear about that work.
Indeed. Okay, it seems that we are very lucky because apparently bioCADDIE website went down just now. I cannot open any of the page, but it seems that actually we have reached the hour. So perhaps we can wrap up. So if I can summarize, you would be happy to join the working group. As I said, we don't intend to do work here rather than summarize and condense what's happened elsewhere to feed into the bioCADDIE developer team, and just so that we can better communicate. I'm going to put very basic structure for the note, which can be more than a note, can be actually, rather than a minute of a code, can be more like a working document in a Google document share with all you, that you can then add further links if we missed any, and if you can help, you know, for either point us to, or yourself summarize the lesson learned really very briefly, and as I say, particularly guide us towards what is there we can reuse as outcome of what you have, or what is there is coming next, and where we can then potentially feed more use cases. Because you said correctly, Martin, that our metrics are really cover different things, and perhaps you can also help us to flesh it out according to what you're already doing, where we can feed those requirements into.
Yeah, I think the short version is that your metrics is a combination of the sort of quantitative matrix that NISO is talking about and that we do in our project, and the more qualitative metrics that CASRA is concerned with. So I think it's a perfect alignment of interests.
Brilliant. And indeed, that's what I would like to get out of the note, is to where we need to provide this information so that we can then continue this within your working group. And just bring up here the summary. Excellent. Okay.
And for those in San Francisco, enjoy the party this weekend.
Oh, it's a party.
No, there's going to be no, because the U.S. Supreme Court just legalized gay marriage across the country. And so San Francisco is going to have probably one big party all weekend. So.
Oh, I see. Some of my team are in San Francisco, just arrived last night. Yeah. Enjoy the party, Jason. and Christy as well, and Martin, which are on that side. Okay, thank you very much. And I will send you the link to the record and everything else. The moment you would be registered to the website, you will have access to everything. Thank you very much for the time and for the information. And look forward to work with you all.
Thank you very much for bringing us together.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.